We end up providing a lot of content here at Cerius, mainly because of the rate of change that is going on right now, especially talent-driven nature of our workforce of the future. And we have seen an increased trend in companies really needing to level up their human capital capabilities. What's happening now is we're seeing one of the fastest evolving areas of the company being in HR. I've sat through a number of AI presentations, and one of the top areas at AI in marketing and HR. You look at talent recruitment, talent retention. We want to make it easy for everyone to stay up to date on the latest changes, trends, and how we can support CEOs and businesses. So we created the Cerius HR Today series. Last month, we talked about how to attract the talent that we want and give them a career where they can thrive. This month's session, we're going to discuss a very timely topic right now, which is providing a safe place in the workforce while staying compliant. We have a saying, which is what's compliant and true on Tuesday is not compliant and true on Thursday. And when I think Chris first started saying that a year ago, I don't think he had any idea what was coming our way. To lead that discussion today, we have one of my favorite all-time, Darren Chiappetti, backed by popular demand. Darren's a global employment attorney, employee relations, HR compliance executive, and an HR leader who has such a passion for caring about employees as well as helping to drive the business forward. We've put his LinkedIn URL in the chat. Highly encourage you, if you have not linked with Darren or had a conversation, highly recommend you to have one. And Darren, I think we did the first version a year ago and we asked for feedback, and the majority of the feedback was, when is the 2.0 version? When is the second version? And I thought, who else could do a session on compliance? And everyone is asking for more. So we brought you back again this year.
Thank you.
Very excited.
Hi, everyone. I'm Darren Chiappetti. Thank you, by the way, for the introduction, Kristen. I think that was actually my first time having a conversation for Serious Executives was doing this. So I'm glad they invited me back after we talked about compliance. It's funny, Kristen and I chatted about doing a 2.0, obviously a lot last year, but we really revisited it in November. And I had this really awesome idea of what I was going to cover and how things were going to go. And I had to basically scrap it on January 20th and redo the presentation because there's a whole new host of things that likely we want to talk about. So just to give a quick background about who I am, I spent 20 years at Disney theme parks. My very first job, I'll bring my little Jungle Cruise guy here, was a Jungle Cruise skipper at the Magic Kingdom in Florida. And so if you hear cheesy jokes and my mannerisms are very Jungle Cruise, by the way, just never left me. And then I also spent the past 10 years at some of the studios here in Hollywood, which are very fun stories when you talk about compliance and employee relations. And most recently had the wonderful opportunity to be the first head of HR for the World Cup in 2026, which hasn't happened yet. But unfortunately, no offense to anybody who's on the line from Florida, I spent 20 years there. They wanted me to move to Miami. And if you have faced that humidity, and walked out of your house and immediately sweat like I do, it just wasn't going to happen. So anyway, I'm glad to be back here in California. I changed a little bit of the flavor, even the name of of our today's conversation, which is more the intersection of culture and compliance, because that's kind of what is intersecting and clashing right now. It's a lot of things. And by the way, I love interaction. So this is the Darren Show 2.0. There's a lot going on. There are certain things that employees are looking to you as the employer to help them get through, to help them understand. Obviously, your CEOs and your business leaders and your managers and partners are looking to you. I think a lot of us will agree with HR has always been an incredibly important function, but HR took center stage around the pandemic, and it's just evolved into a different situation where you're really relied upon for many, many things. And so I try to cover as many things as possible in here. There is so much more to the conversation. I know that. I don't, first of all, I'm going to just call myself out. I don't have all the answers to all the questions we're going to talk about today. And these things are definitely rapidly changing, but let's kind of dive in. If you're anything like me, you look like this every single day. This is probably about 50% of my day I have this look. One of the reasons why I chose Beaker is because my first management job at Disney was managing the Muppet Vision attraction. So I have an affinity for the Muppets, and I'm an HR character, so I should make a Muppet out of my. I'm gonna actually ask Disney if we can do that. That'd be fantastic. There's a lot going on. If you wake up every day, if you're like me, you get your news alerts. At some point, you have to put it away because it is so consuming as to wait, what? What's going on? What does that mean? And so let's talk about kind of what's going on in the world today. There's a lot of things from an HR perspective. DEI is obviously a focus. Everyone's trying to figure out, what does this mean? What does this mean for me as a private employer? I know certain things happen with executive orders. We talked about AI, right? And Krista was mentioning with the AI note takers, but there's a lot of things that are going on from an HR perspective. There's privacy concerns. There's a change in government and legislation. There was a big kind of union uprising. What does all of this basically mean? What it means is no one knows what's going on, and we're all asking for help, right? Because there's just too many things coming at us too quickly. Just to start the tone, again, sort of like I don't have all the answers. I don't want everyone to feel like you have to keep up with absolutely everything that is going on. It will be too consuming. The way I look at it is to be prepared for your leaders. They're going to ask you questions, they're going to read things. Focus on those trends, those laws, those things that are changing in the industry that are going to affect your company and your industry. If you could just kind of take all the information that is just, it's everywhere, and corral it down to kind of what's going to be most important and relevant to you, that might help with being overloaded with too much information. So being prepared, I think, is one of the themes that I definitely want to throw out. Being aware, listen, be proactive. I know as HR leaders, sometimes when we walk around the work environment, we don't want to hear certain things that are being said, but it's important to be proactive and to understand where everyone is. Where are your leaders when you do your check-ins with them? Ask them how they're doing, not just from business perspective, how are they doing in general, right? Because there's so many, work is no longer work, home is no longer home. It kind of bleeds in, right? And so everything is meshed together. So be aware, listen, be proactive. And what we'll talk about today too is remember that when you learn certain things as HR, the conversation doesn't end there. There are things that we have to do, there are steps we have to take. And so when you're listening, you're being aware. Also remember there's certain responsibilities that you might have. Be current to the extent that you can, right? I'm sure by the end of our presentation today, I'm going to look at my news alerts, and one or two things that maybe we chatted about today potentially had some changes or updates or impacts, right? So stay current if you can, but stay current on laws, what's going on in society, what's going on with employees, work and non-work stressors. Those are going to show themselves. Be kind to yourself. It's really tough to be in HR right now. Gone are the days, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, maybe even longer, where HR was kind of that personnel department, and it was celebrating anniversaries and, dealing with administrative tasks. I think a lot of people have looked at HR and said, I can't do that. I could not do that. I don't know how you do it. So we have to give ourselves credit, but be kind. There's a lot coming at you. Be kind to yourself. Obviously, be kind to others, and take a breath. Like, again, focus on what you can control. Focus on what you need to know. A lot of stuff is coming on. What is this fueled by? New management, right? There are sweeping changes that have already changed our world. We don't 100% know how it's going to change going forward, but we know things are going to change, right? So some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and unfortunately we can't cover everything, is those challenges to DEI, programs, initiatives. What does that mean? What's going on? What are the next steps? How do we think it's going to impact? What can we do to think about it, get ahead of it? How can we basically make us as lawsuit proof as possible? The focus on immigration status and deportation of undocumented workers. It is very real, a possibility that ICE can show up at a workplace. In fact, there's going to be a lot more ICE showing up at work sites. What happens when they get to the front door? What happens if you're, I used to be the head of employment litigation for Darden restaurants. These are hospitality folks. They want to be helpful. It's very difficult as a leader sometimes an organization say, I know this is a hospitality organization and you want to be helpful. Don't be helpful. And I'm not saying to impede, but don't give out information willingly. So there's things that we should do for our leadership and just make sure that we're prepared. Hopefully it never happens. There's probably a very small percentage that it will, but it certainly can. One of the companies that I worked for, NBC Universal, is under the microscope right now for their DEI practices. So if we think it can't happen to us in our work environment, environment, it certainly can. Concerns about use of AI at work, like Kristen mentioned, AI is being used for a bunch of different things. I'm going to talk about it probably more from the candidate perspective, because I think that's where the biggest risk is for us in HR with AI, is those kind of almost like delegating the reading through the resumes task to AI as opposed to a human recruiter. Obviously, privacy concerns are always, I think literally this morning, I think I saw something happen with a privacy issue regarding trying to get information regarding employees. I can't remember exactly what I read because there's so many things going on, but it happens every single day. Loss of protections for LGBT Americans. That's coming up. That's something that you should be aware of. If you have employee resource groups that, for that affinity group, please be aware that there's probably a lot of concern, fear. That group is probably going to need some attention. They might come to you and ask for certain things. But that is happening very, obviously as we speak. And then more changes to admin agencies, almost too much to keep up with what happens with the EEOC, the National Labor Relations Board, OSHA. These are things to keep on your radar. We'll talk about a couple little things just so you've got some information that I think is important to know, but there's certainly a lot more to come. Remember, everything changes quickly. So this is my little disclaimer. Maybe if we do have AI note takers right now, which is the information that we're talking about today is likely only good until like 11:01 a.m. today, or sorry, 12:01 p.m. today, when this ends, because things are going to change. And the takeaway from that is I always remind people, even if you're taking notes, which I think is great, or you remember something that I said, which I appreciate if you do, always check to ensure that your understanding is still current before you give that guidance and advice, because things are changing very quickly. Let's jump into a little example. And the examples that I use are examples that are real, that I've dealt with or been a part of. And the names are changed to protect the innocent, right? Scott is the employee relations leader and TV production HR business partner lead for XYZ Entertainment, which is a major legacy TV media network. It's part of a bigger family of divisions that also includes cable television and theme parks. Like many other companies, XYZ has robust DEI programs that aim to foster inclusion and belonging amongst its employees, actors, and crew. As a part of its overall DEI program, XYZ also has employee resource groups, ERGs, for employees based on demographics or affinities, offering ERGs based on the following commonalities or characteristics. These are very similar to most companies, right? Asian Pacific Americans, Black employees, Indigenous employees, which is a pan-tribal, kind of just Indigenous anywhere. Disabled employees, LGBTQ, represent, which is basically, hey, we're a global organization. We have offices all over the world. That's really diverse. And so it's a kind of representation from global offices, Latinx, Hispanic employees, veterans, WIN, Women's Inclusion Network, and Young Professionals Network, which are employees that are early in their career. Each month, the WIN group, the Women's Inclusion Network, hosts a women's breakfast that is that's actually the advertised name in association with the event, where they have a guest speaker. It's either a company executive or it's somebody from the outside that usually comes in and talks to the group about either relevant topics, but it's always kind of focused on elevating the women achieving corporate business success. The XYZ HR team is comprised of all female employees, with the exception of Scott and Tim, who's an HR coordinator. As a part of his job duties to coordinate the logistics and the speakers, Tim does attend the women's breakfast each month. Scott was not ever invited to join. And each month, as the entire team kind of walks over, they would tell Scott, hey, we're headed off to the women's breakfast. And Scott would basically jokingly say, have a great time at the discrimination breakfast. And the team and Scott would basically kind of laugh about it as they walked out the door. On one occasion, moments before the women's breakfast was about to start, Mandy, who is Scott's boss, came running into the office saying, I need your help. We have a potential ER issue. Greg, who is a male, he's an admin assistant within the XYZ organization, said he wanted to attend the breakfast this month because there was a guest speaker that he wanted to hear. The speaker was a prominent, well-respected industry leader that was known for giving sage, helpful advice on career advancement. When Greg asked the HR team if he could join, he was told no, the breakfast is only for women. Greg then said, so because of my gender, I'm not allowed to hear the same career advice as my female coworkers. As Mandy relayed the story in a bit of a frenetic fashion, because the breakfast was about to start, she ended by asking Scott if we have a monthly breakfast sponsored by the Women's Inclusion Network for women to hear advice from other women, speaker was female, it's okay to tell men, no offense, Scott, that they are not able to join, right? I mean, is that discrimination? All right, I'm going to turn it back to you. Obviously, you can use the chat. If you were Scott, How would you answer Mandy? Do you think it's discrimination?
And I'm just very glad that I did not choose that path in life because being able to know how to handle this in each situation, and I know for you there's a number of nuances you're going to be walking us through. So far, we've
Yeah.
got Anne. She says yes. Karen's saying ERGs and their events need to be open to all employees.
Yep.
I'd let anyone attend, but make it clear the purpose of the group. May or may not be discrimination, but it would have been ideal to invite all employees.
I think everyone's on the right track. At the end of the day, your affinity groups need to be just that. Whether or not you actually have that layer of diversity, affinity is kind of really should be open to as many as possible. I'm jumping ahead of myself because we are going to talk about kind of what's going on with the executive order, but I will tell you under the executive order, this is specifically called out. So this is a real situation that happened that specifically is called out that the administration is going to say that is discriminatory. Let me back up for a second. I'm going to switch the example because I like that someone said, listen, it may or may not be. So I want to talk about the George Floyd situation for a while. When I was at Universal Music Group, obviously that's when everything kind of happened, and the Black Employee Network came to me and said, "Hey, listen, we want to talk about this. There are things that we want to talk to each other about, and we want to kind of see how everyone's feeling. Is it okay if we just have a meeting for employees that are Black or represent themselves as Black because we want to talk about how we as Black employees are feeling regarding the situation? Can we do that?" Now, that feels very discriminatory. It feels very exclusionary. However, what I said was, you can do it once. What I think you can do is you can say, because we can only understand what the Black experience is like from somebody who is Black, I think it's important to have that conversation. But I will suggest that at the same time, there might be an affinity conversation, or at the end of that discussion, that's maybe part one, which is an hour, maybe then, after that hour, everyone joins the room and has an open discussion. So there's ways to do it where you're getting the information that you need based on a protected class, but you're not being exclusive, right? So and so by the way, I was Scott. This is me. This is a company I used to work for. And so I told my boss, yes, absolutely, that's discriminatory. You are telling somebody because of your gender, you cannot take advantage of it offering here at the company, right? And so did it go anywhere? No, they still did it. But I think the practice probably has changed. Let me ask, are there any other yellow flags based on anything else that I said here that you think should be addressed? Anyone?
Just as a side comment from Punish said, you can't
Yeah, I
change.
wanted to comment on that. I wanted to comment on that. One of the things too that I mentioned when I talked about this situation when I was at Universal Music Group is you do not police this. If somebody walks in the door and you do not think that they are the certain layer of diversity that you are asking for, you do not ask them. Okay, you can advertise, you can mention what the purpose is, but you do not police it because you're absolutely right. That's making a lot of assumptions.
The comment that was made by Scott.
Right. So Scott was joking around, and I think what you mean is as they walked out each month, Scott, Darren was like, "Hey, have a great time at the discrimination breakfast." Is it HR's responsibility to follow up on that? Absolutely. Now, listen, since I was Scott, I was joking, right? Because it didn't bother me. But I was making a point because of who I am, what my background is. There's one other thing that I am curious if anyone picked up on. Let me go back really quick to this slide. Look at the groups that are offered from an affinity perspective. Is there anything there that is a yellow flashing light for anybody? In my opinion, there should be. And by the way, I also gave this advice when I was there and it didn't change.
JJ
So
says disabled question mark.
great. Yeah. So the group's name specifically is my abilities. In the quest to just kind of put down kind of what the protected classes are, I just put disabled in there. But you're right. My abilities is a lot more inclusive, right? There's one more that I'm specifically thinking of, and I'll just give you a hint because it's just a time I know I need to jump into the next stuff. The very last group, Young Professionals Network. Any concerns about that?
Not protected class.
There should be. And I was like, make it, emerging work, emerging leaders, things like that. But exactly, someone said age discrimination. Do not, please. Again, everyone can do what they want to do from a company perspective. My best advice to you is don't put down Young Professionals Network, right? There's a million reasons why people enter the workforce later in life, and it really does not feel very welcoming or inclusive. So that's another yellow flag I might point out. Good job on that. let's talk about this DEI. What's going on? What do we do? We heard about it. Are we going to step on landmines? January 21st, there was Executive Order 14173, where directs federal agencies to combat illegal private sector DEI preferences, mandates, policies, programs, activities, and take all appropriate action to have private employers advance MEI, merit, excellence, intelligence, focusing on individual initiative, excellence, and hard work. What does that mean? Right? What is illegal private sector DEI? Because all of us have been operating under a framework of laws that basically tell us what's illegal and what's not illegal. So what does this mean? At the end of the day, we don't know yet. However, there's some things in the executive order that might give a clue as to where your yellow flashing lights should probably go off. Basically, we're saying illegal DEI activities are illegal discrimination and preferences. Okay, kind of things that everyone is aware of under Title VII and probably under applicable state laws, right? Workforce balancing based on race, color, sex, sexual preference, religion, and national origin. That kind of speaks to quotas and things like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But again, in some respects, that's been covered by the law. On the second bullet, does anyone note something that seems a little different from normally how it's described? Sexual preference, JD, absolutely. Sexual orientation is a legal term. Sexual orientation is the accepted term, right? Here is a little bit of a change referring to as a preference, right? Don't know if that's foreshadowing, not sure what's going on, but that is a change that I did notice that a lot of people notice because it's kind of out of the ordinary of how it's described. There's a new civil rights, thank you for saying yikes, I agree. New civil rights policies against corporate DEI programs. So this is kind of a wait and see, everybody. We don't know, right? So by May 21st, the Attorney General and basically all the heads of the agencies are going to come together and submit a report. What's in that report, or what's supposed to be in that report, is going to be their recommendations collectively as to how they can assist in ending this illegal discrimination in private sector DEI. And kind of there's some, a proposed strategic like enforcement plan of how they're going to do that. I do want to point out there is an exception for employment preferences. Again, there's that word that we just talked about for military veterans and for disabled employees. It's important with the disabled employees to talk about that because that's not going to affect the ADA. It's not going to affect your reasonable accommodations, right? Or your state laws that have things like that. And it right now does allow for other exceptions for military veterans. So please kind of be aware of that. But I think we're all kind of like holding our breath until May 21st. Obviously, I don't think that's just kind of submitting the report, making recommendations, but we may have more understanding in the middle of May as to what this basically means. But what are those risks that HR and legal that we should all think about now? That our CEO is looking at us going, okay, what do we do? Do we disband our efforts? Do we have any new DEI? Do we put it on hold? Do we put it on pause? What do we do? Well, know that probably what's going to happen is increased risk of discrimination claims and lawsuits, whether it's agency charges from a state agency or the EEOC or whatever situation it could be. There's going to be some challenges, right? More scrutiny from federal or state agencies. Again, we all live in different locations. I imagine there's a bunch of cool places that are represented by everybody that are here today. There are some states that are more in alignment with the framework that we're talking about. There are some states that look at it a little differently, right? So state law is also important to make sure that you factor in. There will be more internal employee complaints, maybe even questions where they're trying to understand that, seeking to understand situation, allegations of discrimination, even if they're based on misinformation, right? What happens is somebody watches TV and hears a comment that somebody made, whether it was a politician or a newscaster or something like that. And then it becomes kind of like gospel, right? And then people will kind of spread it, things like that. So if it's based on misinformation, still they're going to bring forth concerns. Obviously, we can educate, but be aware. And that's going back to making sure that we are being proactive and listening. And I'll talk about it a little bit further in the presentation as a reminder of what our responsibilities are as HR and what our leaders' responsibilities are when they do hear things like this, maybe even in passing from our employees. There will be that increased scrutiny from employees, customers, clients, the public, social media news story. You could really just jump on right now and see where there is very strong opinions both ways for certain companies who are double downing, on DEI, or folks that are maybe changing approaches and things like that. That's going to continue. Obviously, social media really is a reputational harm risk, but it's important to be aware of the fact that, hey, people feel more empowered to speak up, which is a good thing. But there's are things that we should probably just be ready for if we don't already have some type of a plan in case something happens. So the current DEI scrutiny level is on DEFCON 1, as I like to. So these are the things that I think that if you discover as you're looking through your policies and programs in the company, you might want to look at potentially tweaking some of them. So where the focus probably is going to be is on equal employment opportunity situations, right? So if there's any hiring or promotion policies that really kind of calls out an explicit preference or that this is a program, again, internships or mentoring programs that are just for a certain layer of diversity than others, that could be problematic. I know a lot of folks were not here last time I did the presentation, but I did do an example last year, again, at a company that I worked for, where there was a great idea to come up with this awesome leadership kind of advancement program, which included mentors, included all these really great, again, guest speakers and things like that. And at the end of it, the goal was to get somebody into a leadership position. It was only for one ERG with a very specific demographic. And I remember when they came to me, they said, "Hey, we're going to do this great program." I'm like, "I love that. That's fantastic. When are you rolling out the leadership programs to all the other ERGs?" And it's like one of those things where you realize, sometimes you are the office where dreams go to die, because you saw that the excitement drain from people's face when they realize, oh crap, I never thought about that. Yeah, you have to. And again, unfortunately, that prophecy came true, and I had kind of people knocking on my door saying, "Where's my program? How come there's only one for this layer of diversity? Am I not important? Does the company not feel that I'm leadership material?" So what I always tell folks is, and I understand kind of why this needs to be looked at, is you don't want to make it look as if as an organization you are endorsing one layer of diversity over another, right? Again, equal employment opportunity, that should really guide you, because that's really what the goal is, to make sure everybody has the same fair shake.
So Darren, quick question on
Yeah.
that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please do.
With that, I've pushed this in the past, and a simple example, I've had manufacturing locations, 50% minority, 50% women. And you look at your first line supervisors and managers, and it's 90% white male. So we informally had a program to reach out to dynamic team leads that were female or minority to encourage them, but we didn't have an official program.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that stuff gonna still be okay, but we talked about
Here's what I love about what you said is you sought out dynamic team leads. That is EEO right there. That's neutral. You're not saying that you're looking at certain populations for it. You're basically saying, of the diverse employees that we have, or diverse pool of candidates, right? We're looking for those that are dynamic. That's where I would focus on it, right? I would focus on, this is the personality that we're looking for. At the end of the day, if your demographics in a certain plant or location are going to probably stay the same, that's a safe. I think you're seeing hesitation from me and probably a lot of other folks too, because I don't 100% know. You still can try to bring more diverse folks in, but I think the way you framed it, whether or not what you realized what you did or not, was fantastic, because that is the legitimate, non-discriminatory purpose for this program, is we need more dynamic team leads, right? And so that, I think, is what you're going to see a lot of recommendations on. Focus on traits that are neutral, that are EEO, that are, if you were to write a job description, what traits are you looking for? Focus on that. Yeah, in the back of your mind, you realize, probably they're going to be from a certain demographic. But if that's the candidate pool to choose from, then that's the candidate choose. That's what you do, and you choose the best candidate for that job, right? That's a great example. That's going to come up, and it absolutely is. I think actually I might even have it here in a second. Training, employee training. So some states require it, some cities require it, and some states don't. But that sexual harassment, anti-discrimination training is something that I would recommend you continue to do. A lot of, again, by law, I think you have to do it in certain places, some places you don't. But that's not really what's going on here. However, If you are doing a custom-made anti-harassment class, just make sure you're looking at the material to be careful about what the focus on basically is if there's race stereotyping or gender-based stereotyping. Not that any other stereotyping is good, it's not, right? But that's kind of what the focus is. So, could implicit bias, unconscious bias classes could be on the radar? They could be, right? And so I wish we had more definitive, but these are the things that I would just probably have yellow flashing lights to look at. Let's see, question, sorry. Is it an issue to try to have a leadership team that's representative of the employee population? No, but it depends on how you're framing it, right? And so one of the things that's at a later slide, but we'll talk about it now, is if you have DEI goals or aspirations that are tied to performance or compensation, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, right? That's going to be something that's going to be looked at. So you certainly can try. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but the best way to do that is to through recruiting, because you still can have your recruitment efforts at historical Black colleges and things like that. You can still have programs with high schools with underrepresented students and things like that. But you want to just focus on broadening out that candidate pool. I think if you can kind of use that as your broken record, we're just trying to have a diverse pool of candidates. I think that's going to guide you as opposed to we want to have a diverse candidate. So we'll talk more about it a little bit later, but hopefully that helps because it is up in flux right now, how you describe it and how you do it. ERG affinity groups, again, I kind of talked about it. The policies exclude employees based on protected characteristics. That's pretty much on the chopping block, right? That's on the list. It's on the radar. Supplier diversity, initiatives that mandate. Again, it's going back to if you have an explicit preference, if you're mandating, if you're calling out a specific layer of diversity, that's where obviously you're going to have some red flashing lights. Policies, if it limits speech or expression, which a lot of policies don't, but it could be something as innocent as a manager walking through and there's a heated argument between two employees over politics. And they joke like, hey, haven't you ever heard, the old adage of you shouldn't talk about politics and religion? Like they might take that as a policy, right? And so make sure your leaders understand what that means and what to do if certain things do come up. So what can we do to get ready? Again, because we don't have the answers, but we're trying to anticipate. Review those DEI programs and the training materials like we talked about. Take note of those hiring. And so this, I think, is where we're kind of catching a lot of the questions that are kind of coming in, which is you want a diverse pool of candidates. You don't want a diverse candidate. In my preparing for our conversation today and trying to understand how I can look at it from a very easy to understand mindset, that's where I'm at with it. Because no one's saying not to have a diverse pool of candidates. I think the issue is, targeting one specific group. Ensure objective, job-related questions and a selection rationale. And then I'll tell you why in a second, because there'll be more scrutiny on selections that are consistent with the EEO principles. And again, EEO, equal employment opportunity. Everyone gets the same fair shake and opportunity, regardless of race, religion, color, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, age, all those things, right? This is where I was kind of talking about it. I think based on, can we kind of have this situation where we increase diversity? Absolutely. But if you're tying it to a goal, that's going to be a little bit more scrutinized. Again, that race-based, gender-based objectives, certain goals to have the team. And this is exactly kind of what the question was, right? Represent the client base, represent the community. It depends on what the company is, right? Because if the company makes a comment like, I want to represent the client base, and the client base skews towards one layer of diversity than another, that could be used to say that there was a bias against somebody who doesn't look or feel like somebody that is their client base or in that community. So this is again guideline, but it's really kind of it's case by case, very specific, very much it depends, right? Retrain managers and TA and HR teams. Make sure that they remind themselves. And when I say legally compliant DEA, that's kind of today's definition of legally compliant DEA, because that obviously can change. And how it ties in to support the core business. One way you would always defend a practice is that you want to say, this is why it's core to our business. This is why it's important to us, right? It's part of your culture, it's part of your values, but this is why it is part of the fabric of who we are. There needs to be a business reason for it as well. The question is, this may be outside the scope of discussion, but do we know if the board diversity rule is now moot, that board of directors need to have diverse numbers? I wouldn't say anything is moot. It's a really great question, by the way. I would say look at whatever type of mandate or rule against this framework. And if it looks and feels like some of the things that we just talked about, I might want to reframe it. You might want to look at it, talk to counsel about how to, how to look at it differently. Um, because really the best answer I can give to anyone is everything potentially could be on the radar. Just know that. Like I just mentioned, you want to reframe those efforts, reframe vernacular, emphasize inclusion, and that workplace culture, that leadership development, EEO principles are kind of a part of that sustainable business practices that you have. It's not preferential. It's not preferential. It's sustainable. But the thing is, you have to make sure you're doing it for everyone. That's the key. The key is, again, if you look at EEO, that's going to be a great litmus test for you to go, are we truly saying it's equal for everyone, or are we giving pathways to certain layers of diversity and not those same pathways to others? It's tough because it's kind of contrary to guidance that maybe we've looked at in the past. But it's evolving, and so we'll definitely stay tuned and a lot more to come. Let's test our knowledge here. We call it HR Hail because when people do great things in HR, they love us, or HR Jail because we can obviously put the company in a crazy spot. So an employee is offended that the company is celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, claiming that to do so is discriminatory and illegal. What do you think? Employee comes to you and says this to you. What response would you have? Or what would you do next?
And I would comment on this one as everyone's answering in the chat, is though HR leaders and individuals in this session probably know the answer, and we're going to have some great ones here, educating the rest of the leadership team and educating the CEO on how to respond, because more times than not, especially as a company is growing, I'm in discussions with CEOs where the employees are coming directly to them and not HR. Not every company has that automatic defense of HR. So educating the leadership team on, if someone comes to you in these situations, here is your response. And more, it's passing this knowledge onto others on the leadership team.
Thank you, Kristen, for that. I appreciate that as well. So the best advice that I would say is understand from the employee why they feel that way, right? Because it depends. If the employee is like, well, I am European American. Where's my European American Heritage Month? Like, if they're saying that they feel it's discriminatory because it is, they don't have something that they identify with that the company is doing. In other words, you're endorsing one layer over another. You might want to consider how you look at things like that. In and of itself, is it discriminatory? No, it's not. Is it illegal? No, it's not. Always understand the why behind the question, because there could be something or a thread there that you really need to kind of go for a little bit. And sometimes it just comes down to respect. They want to feel heard, they want to feel valued and respected, right? An employee is insubordinate to their leader, claiming they aren't taking direction from a DEI hire because they clearly didn't get the job based on merit and they don't know what they're doing. Seek to understand what it is they're talking about, but can you take action against an employee who's insubordinate solely because they feel that their leader is a DEI hire? Can you do that? Can you? Yes. It's case specific. You might want to talk to counsel, but I don't also want people to back off. Yes, thank you. It's a performance issue. Don't back off of holding people accountable because they use DEI or something in the same sentence. And you kind of go, oh, I think I don't want to touch that. I get it. It's a landmine. Totally get it. But that's where you want to talk to counsel and things like that. Do not be afraid to hold people accountable, because if you don't hold that person accountable for performance and insubordination, you can't hold others accountable for other acts of insubordination and things like that that could be similar. An employee asked to create a new ERG or DRG called the League of Straight White Men. Very quickly, do you have to create this group? Should you create this group? If you're the employer that if you're XYZ Entertainment and you had that list and they came up to you and said, I want to start this group, what do? You start it or you say no? Here's what I would do. You start it. You monitor, understand kind of what's going on, but as a company, you're not going to say your layers of diversity don't deserve a group, but theirs do, right? And I know I haven't checked. Maybe that happened so far. We could, look and see. But yeah, again, it's always looking at EEO, equal. Let's make sure representate who's included, who's not included, things like that. It's a great way from an overarching perspective to look at it. Immigration enforcement. All right. A lot going on here. I'm going to go very quickly, or you do very, very cursory. You could certainly do, in fact, I recommend that you do a deeper dive so that when you train folks at your company, you talk to Kristen's point, talk to the CEO, make sure everyone aware is if ICE shows up at my door, you want them to already know what to do. You know, just before the session here, I was watching the news about the Delta crash in Toronto, and it was a great testament where they basically said the flight attendants, where most people think that they're just kind of making you comfortable and serving drinks, they prepare for this so quickly that in the moment when a plane flips over, they do exactly what to do. You want your employees to be that for any government agency that comes on site, whether it's ICE or anybody else, right? And so they don't have to think about it, just like those flight attendants, they jump into action. So HR should prepare for, anticipate increased I-9 audits, inquiries, right? If you haven't audited your I-9s, you probably want to do that. You certainly, if you have in-house counsel or an external employment lawyer, you probably want to talk to them as well. Increase ICE enforcement actions at the worksite, like I mentioned, it's already happening now, right? Let's make sure everyone understands what that means. Employee work authorization, it might just end magically, abruptly, through no fault of their own. So please do understand that. Potential for ICE to consider criminal charges against employees and managers. This is a new one. If the manager or HR knew, ignored, or should have known they were undocumented. That's kind of the standard when you talk about harassment. If we knew or should have known, we're responsible. This is something that ICE is going to try. So please be aware, not to scare your leaders, but let's just prepare them that this might be something that comes up. Chris, great question about affirmative action planning, about federal contractors and EEOC, and there's intersections of a lot of things that are going on. I don't have an answer for you just yet. I'm certainly happy to offline that one because there are so many competing agencies with different priorities that that's going to be a little bit of a tough one to answer. But what Chris is showing is the complexity of what's going on. Because you have certain laws that say this, other laws now say this, and there's certain practices, and they all are kind of in collision right now. So there's a lot that needs to be redefined. All right, conduct that self-audit, like I mentioned, talk to counsel, create that policy. Who is your designated company rep? HR, it might be you. I hate to tell you, if you don't have an on-site lawyer, right? So have a conference space. Get them out of your main area. There's a lot of best practices to consider, but you don't want, especially if you're like a hospitality or very visible customer guest-driven location, you don't want ICE's presence, obviously, in your lobby, right? If you're a hotel. Educate leaders on what that means. Is ICE there to ask questions? Are they there for an audit? Are they delivering a subpoena? Do they have a warrant? This, depending on what they're there for and what they show you, governs where they go and what they get and when they get it, if that makes sense. Way too much to actually have that conversation today, but know that it's really important to ask for credentials, look at their badges, and see what are you there for, what documents do you have. That's actually going to help guide what happens next. Educate employees about their rights. An employee does not have to answer any questions that a government agent is asking them, especially if it could lead to a criminal action. It literally is Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent, right? Employees do not have to say, if an ICE agent walks in and says, is Darren working today? They don't have to say that. If an employee, if a ICE agent necessarily comes in and goes, hey, I need to see Darren Chiappetti, where is he? Where can I find him? You don't need to say that. There are certain things just to be aware of. And I know it's really complicated. It's really not the type of training you want to delve into, but where we are today, if you think you could be on the radar, you need to make sure that you're getting ready for this. Review incorporate state-specific duties and responsibilities. For example, California, right? If there's an I-9 audit that's routine, you must provide notices to employees. You can't give, ICE or government agents any access to non-public areas if they don't have a warrant. In fact, if you have non-public areas that are adjacent to public areas, put up a sign, right? I go back to my 20 years at Disney, at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, cast members only. There are signs everywhere. That means you can't go here, right? Those are going to help you in situations like this, because if it's not marked completely, then the ICE agent has a warrant might be able to access it. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, I know there's a million questions. Let's just do a couple quick ones here. An employee comes to you claiming that Maria is undocumented, hinting that if the company doesn't call ICE, they will. Couple questions here. If you've done your job with I-9s, there's no reason for you to go back and take a look at it again, right? You don't need to re-audit it. If you do, as a company, want to re-audit and see what's going on with Maria's I-9, you do not tell the employee you're doing that, right? You certainly can ask the employee, help me understand what's the basis of why you're saying this, to see if you can kind of figure out what they're trying to say or what this issue is all about. But as a company, if you, as a company, unless you have absolute proof that there's issues with someone being undocumented, you don't reach out, right? Because they're protected in California. Status of citizenship is protected. If someone gets targeted because of that, that could be discriminatory. There's a lot of this one, by the way, is a massive minefield. The first thing you ever would do was reach out to your compliance or to your counsel. But just kind of playing it through is you wouldn't be calling ICE. Can you prevent and tell an employee not to call ICE? No. You can do not tell an employee not to exercise their legal rights. Now, if they do it, you also get legal counsel. There can be ramifications because it could be that they were doing something specifically to discriminate or harass somebody because of their national origin or their status, right? But then there are so many tangled webs when it comes to this. But at the end of the day, you can't tell anybody that you cannot reach out to an agent. Employees are heard saying to coworkers, speaking other languages, "This is America, speak English." Let me ask, does the United States have an official language? And as we're going through that, no, not yet, but there is a proposal, I think, by a senator to make English the official language. Because of that, any employee can speak any language at any time as long as it doesn't interfere with safety or guest service. That's something that you should just rattle off when people come to you and ask you that question. All right. What could go wrong with AI? AI can be useful. It's widely used in the hiring process, right? It's vetting candidate credentials. It's kind of making hiring decisions, which can be a little scary, about whether or not they're a strong candidate, if they should get moved through, ranking them, things like that. AI algorithms are also being used in performance evaluations, promotion decisions, things like that. AI can be useful, but AI can be biased, right? So AI that's, if it's powering hiring or evaluations or any type of employee life cycle type of situation, it unintentionally could learn or embed or reinforce certain biases that either humans have allowed it to, or by aggregating all the things it's learning and seeing, it's making connections that we never wanted it to, right? Regularly audit those AI powered hiring tools. Be transparent to the extent that you can about algorithm decision makers and provide alternative assessments, because some folks, even from an ADA accommodation perspective, might not be able to use automated systems and things like that. So keep that in mind. But AI also can be challenged. There is a current lawsuit right now against the Workday system. And if anyone's ever applied for a job on Workday, it is a horrible system, by the way. But there is a lawsuit. Let me tell you what it's about very quickly, because it was filed a couple years ago. Basically, Mobley versus Workday. Mobley is a black man over 40 with anxiety and depression. He applied for jobs, over 100 jobs at different companies, but every company that he's alleging that he did not get the job, despite being qualified, was based on a Workday applicant portal system. And basically, what he's saying is, I have all the qualifications for the job. And what he thinks was happening was there was inherent biases in the system, in that if you look at like, hey, here's when I went to college, here's the years I went, here's where I went to college, there's other things that you put in there that it started to learn, oh, okay, that means this age, that means X, Y, and Z. The system was making connections based on protected classifications. Whether or not it's true, that's for them to prove in court, right? But one of the things that he was basically saying is, I'd apply for a job in the middle of the night, and I get an automatic rejection at like 1:30 in the morning. That's evidence that your hiring decisions are made by a machine, not by a human recruiter. So this remains to be seen, but there is an active lawsuit right now. And of course, now it's a class action. So if it goes forward into a certified class, pretty much anybody who has used or applied for a job using Workday that was not selected, potentially based on the same parameters, could join the class. Very interesting situation. And I would watch this if any of you use Workday, your companies use Workday, I certainly would watch this as well.
Hey, Darren, I have a question. We've got
Yep.
about 5 minutes here. What would you recommend to know if our HRIS system, are you auditing it? How are you making sure that if someone challenges it, we have the information to show we are not being discriminatory or that AI is not making the decisions?
I think that's a great question. And of course, in HR, I don't feel qualified to look at my system and audit it to know if it's doing things like that. So we'd have to find the folks that actually would be able to kind of look at the statistics and what's going on, the metrics, and let us know if there's issues there. So you do want to do an audit, and you obviously want to do an audit. You probably want to have your counsel privilege it, right? But you want to do an audit with somebody who's going to understand and make the connections and show you where there is this, unintentional bias and things like that. The other reason why you want to do that is because for those of us in California, by the way, this is a proposed regulation. It's not law just yet. What's coming down the pike, I'll be very, very quick, is basically saying if you're going to use AI-based decision-making tools for hiring or promotion, you have to let everyone know in advance with a notice what it is you're doing, why you're using it, that they have a right to opt out of it, right? And that you can't retaliate if you're like, hey, I don't want to use it. I want to use I want a human recruiter to look at my resume, not your machine based. And the decisions you have to make as a company, because with that is going to be this wonderful situation where as a applicant, if you did not get a job and you think it's because of maybe the AI situation, right? It's very similar to the California privacy CPRA as amended, which many, many companies don't know about, where an employee can say, hey, as a privacy request, I want to know all the places that you have information about me. That includes the applicant tracking system, right? And so this is kind of building upon that, but there's something in red here that if it doesn't scare you, it should, which is basically as a California applicant or employee or whatever, you could find out what the output was that the AI basically said or did, how we used it. Okay, so this is what the AI said about my candidacy. This is as a company how we used it. And then basically how the system's logic was applied to that specific employee or applicant and the key parameters that affected the output with respect to that applicant personally. That's scary, right? So that's where if we are a TA leader, if we are using AI-based systems, understand what the AI is actually doing, because you're going to have to share information with employees, which is going to be can be great if we are buttoned up, but can be a disaster if we're basically not. Okay, real quick. Labor was having a resurgence. I don't know if this is going to happen anymore, right? Because a lot of things were pulled back. There's a new general counsel in the NLRB. They basically took 18 memos that the last council did. And so, as you know, it was very employee friendly. It's now going towards employer friendly. Definitely stay tuned if you're concerned about unionization in the workforce, as far as keeping yourself non-union, or if you're a unionized workforce. Obviously, Section 7 rights and things like that are things that you know well, and you want to keep up on that. So I would say relax a little bit, because there's a lot that hasn't changed yet. What hasn't changed is the law yet, right? So we talk about you're pulling back on DEI, pulling back on LGBT rights and things like that. That's an executive order that has a very limited scope. There are still laws, Title VII, right, of 1964, the Civil Rights Act. There's also state laws. So I want to point out there are federal laws and there are state laws. So there's going to be some clashes you're going to see, and I highlighted those in yellow as to where I see state law is going to clash with federal practices and federal law. And where's that battled out? That's battled out in the courts, right? And so when you look at it, the federal government is basically saying there are two sexes or genders. There's male, there's female, that's it, right? Uncle California says otherwise. So please know that if you're an employer in a state that has a state level law that is in conflict with a federal guidance, something like that, don't just erase certain things because you're like, oh my goodness, we have to do that now because that's the executive order, that's what's going on in the federal. You might actually be violating your state law if you're doing that. And so a lot hasn't changed in the law yet.
As much as we are changing in the environment out there, what resource would you recommend to be able to stay up to date on all of these changes? What are
It's a
your
great.
favorite alerts?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it depends on what your role is, right? I mean, I think that SHRM can be very helpful. So any digest, whether it's Pyra or SHRM or something like that, can be helpful for certain digests. What I like, and it's a little more unique to me, because of my role as a lawyer, is there, the Association of Corporate Counsel has a digest where I get all the legal stuff in. But it depends on what if you have compliance HR, I think it's a Littler Mendelsohn function, is a wonderful tool as well. There's a lot of tools out there that you can use that are kind of those one-stop shops to kind of figure out what in the world is going on. At the end of the day, I think all of them will give you the basics of what you need to know. but dive into things that are more important or more, more germane, I think, to your business. But any of those are great. I would say compliance HR is very helpful. And obviously, if you have internal counsel in your company, or if you have external labor employment counsel, get on their distribution list. So, for example, there's like 3 outside firms that I used when I was inside counsel. I still get their digest, and they are very, very helpful because they're written by lawyers. They're giving you advice. It's not really advice, by the way. They're giving you some guidelines. So if you know, I'm just going to make up, because I love the folks at Ogletree Deacons. If you use Ogletree Deacons for your employment, and you're one of their clients, make sure you are getting the trickle down alerts they send. They're so important to have. So I would suggest that if you can. Real quick, just remember, like I mentioned, if we knew or should have known, that's when you have to act on something. Sort of like what's going on a little bit with the undocumented situation. There are going to be some interesting things. Like, again, people in the workplace might be talking a lot about political views, activities that are political in nature, wearing clothing or buttons, right? Physical attributes, height and weight might be protected, depends on where you are. Offensive clothing and comments, stereotyping, things like that. Even if something's not illegal, you might want to seek legal guidance. And the reason why is, and I know that this is one that probably everyone wants to chat about, but very quickly, just something to consider is a hiring manager was recently informed by HR and legal that the top candidate for a role requiring specialized skills and knowledge, which the candidate has a prior felony conviction. Obviously, they do background checks, right? HR and legal recommended to disqualify the candidate because the conviction raises integrity and judgment issues. The hiring manager adamantly refuses not to hire the candidate. She storms into the HR office and loudly proclaims, if a convicted felon can be the president of the United States, then I refuse not to hire this candidate. This is going to come up at some point somewhere, right? Do I have an answer for you on this one? No. You want to call your legal counsel. It's very fact specific. There's still EEOC factors to consider when you're looking at prior arrests and convictions. But please do know somebody's going to bring this question up going, I don't understand. Why is it, where's the standard here? What do we have to look at? If you're not sure what to do or what to say, which is going to happen a lot, it happens to me all the time. It's okay not to have all the answers. Please know that. It's fine to say, I don't know. I'm not entirely certain, but I will find out. And when you do say that, please make sure you follow up, right? Follow up with them, make sure what's going on. Call your HR peers. Call leadership if you think that person has dealt with it before, has certain knowledge, right? If you have specialized HR groups or people with specialized HR knowledge in your organization, employee relations, labor relations, reach out to them as well. Contact, labor employment counsel or compliance counsel, things like that. It's okay. Put the situation on pause before you make a step. Like I always tell people, once you step on the landmine, it's going to detonate. If you called me in advance, I would have given you a map to avoid the landmine. But that's kind of the how we should look at things going forward. Private employers, at the end of the day, just remember what I'll say is there is no First Amendment freedom of speech right in a private employer. That is only for government action. So if an employee at a private employer says to you, I can say whatever I want, I have freedom of speech. No, you can't. I want to just real quick end on, please, 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 if there's nothing else that you remember from today's session, please remember this. There is no such thing as a formal complaint. Whether it's on a napkin, a crayon drawing, it's interpretive dance or smoke signals. If somebody tells you that something happened, they were harassed, discriminated, something like that, that's it. That's your formal complaint. Do not ask them, do you want to write a formal complaint? Do you want to, there is no such thing as a formal complaint. This is very, very misunderstood. This is when you get in hot water. There's no such thing as the record. The employee comes to you, hey, I don't want anything to happen right now. Just for the record, Jim is harassing me. No, 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 no. There is no record. You knew, they told you, you have to take action, right? This is my Disney coming out. There's a lot of craziness going on, and I wanted to end on a happy note. Take it one day at a time. Remember, there's a great big beautiful tomorrow. Okay, now the dog is over here saying hi. And you got this. Call your phone of friends, call your resources. Understand you're not going to have all the answers all the time. Things are changing at the speed of light, and allow yourself to be okay with not knowing everything, right? That's my email too. If anybody wants to email me, that's fine. Certainly reach out to me in LinkedIn. Sorry, these hours always go by so quickly.
We always think we can cover more than we do, but it's wonderful engagement in the chat, a lot of great questions, and an HR community out there. Please do engage with each other. And this is where we say more than ever, we need each other's support, and we need to be having these conversations, right, wrong, or indifferent, in order to know how is everyone else navigating it. So Darren, thank you so much for your sage
Sure.
advice and walking us through these discussions and just providing a different perspective. And thank you everyone for joining us today and your participation in this. Darren, you're a human animated HR attorney, and I will forever love and thank you for it as we walk through into uncharted territories. And we're going to be able to do that by having these conversations.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.